The October sun of 2020 seemed pale, as if it had lost its strength over the Volyn plains. For me, 15-year-old Maxim, it was just a stretch of freedom from school desks, but later I understood it was the last peaceful autumn of my life. I live in Ukraine, in the town of Bridki. Our village, submerged in gold-gray light, lived by its own unnoticeable rhythm. Me and my friend Vanko had a small dugout on the outskirts. Our dugout, dug with our own hands, reinforced with wood, also had a small built-in stove because it gets chilly here in winter. It smelled of sand, wood, and freedom. Those evenings when we lit the tiny stove and its red eye illuminated our faces seemed eternal. We laughed at stupid things, filmed on our phones, argued about everything in the world, and believed the world lay before us, vast and understandable. The first crack in this idyll appeared that very evening, October 20th, when something big ran across the wooden roof, buried under heavy sand, with an almost human weight. The rumble was as if someone had thrown a sack of potatoes onto the roof. Our fortress shuddered, and laughter froze in the air. Peering into the autumn darkness, we saw nothing, only darkness and the cold breath of wind driving clouds before it. Probably the neighbor's dog, Vanya said dismissively, but a note of tension rang in his voice, one I hadn't heard before. We dropped it, but a shadow of unease remained. Then the village began to change, unnoticeably, but relentlessly. First, there were just rumors. Someone saw something unusual in the field by the river. Not a wolf, not a fox, something else. The movement was clumsy, not animal-like, but not human either. Then a neighbor lost all her chickens. Not stolen, they were found the next morning on the field's edge, just bones. Strangely clean, pale, as if someone had meticulously licked them clean of the last drop of life. Old folks began crossing themselves more often, and a word appeared in their conversations, uttered in whispers, IRKA. My own encounter happened a week later. It was a clear, moonlit night. The air was transparent and cold as ice. I was standing near the house, on the sports field. Suddenly, in the field, about 80, maybe 100 steps away, I noticed movement, a figure. It was running on all fours, but its silhouette had neither the grace of a beast nor the vertical confidence of a human. It felt like it wasn't running, but rather dragging itself, using its limbs only for lack of a better choice. Suddenly it stopped, started breathing like a dog, and then, slowly, as if on an ungainly neck, turned its head in my direction. And then the eyes ignited, two small, sharp points in the darkness. They didn't reflect moonlight. They were themselves the source of light. Cold, yellowish light, like the glow of rotting wood in the forest. It wasn't a reflection. It was an inner void shining through empty sockets. That gaze pinned me, paralyzed me. Then, without a sound, it jerked forward, straight at me. I was saved only by a primal terror that shoved my body over the threshold of the house. I barely managed to slam the door shut, feeling my heart beating against my ribs like a trapped bird. But that night, she came to me herself. I was lying in bed when I heard a light, almost tender knock on the window. The voice from outside was warm, familiar to the point of pain. "Maxim, it's me, Grandma. Open up, I'm freezing." My grandma lived in another city. My mind knew it, but my heart clenched with nostalgia. I had already reached for the handle when a blow came. Not a knock, a blow, dull and strong, making the window glass web with tiny cracks. And the voice changed. It became raspy, hoarse. "Hey, open up, now," it hissed from the darkness. I froze, not breathing. Time seemed to stop. I lay like that until the pale dawn began to spill outside the window, melting the night like black ice. After that incident, our village sank into a strange apathy mixed with fear. News came from the neighboring village. People began to disappear, vanished without a trace. The police shrugged their hands. Doors unlocked, belongings left behind, but people gone. Sometimes there was a stain on the threshold, dark, almost black in the flashlight's beam. Then the first discoveries in the fields, bodies, or what was left of them, pale, bloodless. The local doctor, an old man who remembered the war, just shook his head. No blood, not a drop. The official version screamed maniac, but something else was readable in the eyes of the old folks. They whispered among themselves a word that froze the soul, Nevmerly, the undead. IRKA. The following months passed in tense expectation. Winter came early, covering the fields with a white shroud. It seemed peace came with the snow. Even the police, it seemed, were on the trail of some maniac. Dad's orders not to open the door to anyone began to feel like overcaution. That Sunday, March 26th, began perfectly normally. My parents went to the city on business, promised to be back by 4, but got delayed. My sister Katya and I spent the evening with our usual routines. She was drawing, I was watching videos. Outside, the spring darkness slowly thickened. The knock on the door sounded unexpectedly. "Who is it?" Katya chirped cheerfully, running to the door. The reply came in a weak, choked voice, in which I barely recognized Mom. "It's us. Open up." "And the password?" Katya continued playfully. It was our family tradition. The pause dragged on, and then from the darkness came Dad's voice, familiar, even a bit cheerful. "Zaluba!" That was our cat's name. Laughing, she turned the handle. Her scream was short. Not a scream of fear, but something worse. The sound of absolute pure horror that tears the very fabric of reality. It rang out and died, as if someone had cut off the air supply. My brain refused to process it for a second. Then instinct shoved me into motion. I rushed to the door, which she had managed to swing wide open. No one was on the doorstep, only cold air rushing into the house. But from far away, from the direction of the fields, came a muffled, gulping sound. I ran out onto the porch, switching on the yellow beam of my flashlight on the run. And I saw. 20 meters away, on the muddy spring road, a figure loomed. The same one. It was dragging my sister's helpless body along the ground. Its long, thin, almost bony arms were dug deep into the girl. The movement wasn't hurried, but confident, like a ritual. Then something strange happened. The horror didn't paralyze me. On the contrary, it transmuted into a cold, clear fury. I didn't think. I rushed after them, grabbing the first thing my hand found on the way, a heavy log from a pile of straw. Adrenaline burned in my blood, making the world sharp and my movements explosive. I caught up with them at the edge of the field. The blow was frenzied with all my strength. The log hit the creature in the back with a dull, soft crunch. It stopped, dropped its prey to the ground, and then turned to me. The flashlight beam fell on its face. It was devoid of a nose, just 2 black holes. The skin on its head glistened like rotten parchment stretched tight over a skull. But the most terrifying thing was the mouth. It was open, and inside, instead of teeth, I saw chaos. Dark, uneven fragments, like fossilized thorns. Some small, sharp, others long, twisted, several times larger than human teeth. But the worst were the eyes. Those same 2 empty sockets from which poured that same cold, dead radiance. It didn't shine, it seeped through reality, flooding everything around with a yellowish, poisonous light. That gaze was beyond emotion. Not hatred, not hunger, just presence. A fact, like a law of nature. From that gaze, my hands weakened. The log fell. I tried to take a step, but my legs turned to cotton. It twisted its face as if trying to reproduce a smile. A sound tore from its throat, something between the hiss of a snake and the wheeze of an old wolf. And it lunged. Its strength was absurd, like a concrete slab had crushed me. I couldn't move. It pressed me into the cold, damp earth, and I smelled it. A mix of raw clay, decay, and something metallic. Salty. Then it reached out its hand, not to strike. It touched my shoulder, and its long, thin fingers, cold as ice, seemed to go inside. There's no better word. They seeped through the skin, the muscles, finding something deep within. The pain wasn't sharp, but deep, bursting, as if someone were pulling a living nerve out of you along with your soul. I screamed as long as I could, yelled for help. And then it bent to my neck. I felt the touch of those uneven, cold teeth, a sensation of sharp, dry cutting, and then not pain, but an incredible emptiness, as if I had suddenly become lighter, more transparent. I was filled with a cold rising from my own guts. The world narrowed to those two yellow lights merging into one. Then, darkness. I woke up in the white, sterile world of a hospital. The first thing I understood, I could move my right hand, but my left, it simply wasn't there. A nurse, with pity in her eyes, explained it to me in a quiet voice. The bone wasn't just broken, it was shattered, torn apart along with the muscles and vessels. Amputation was the only chance. Katya wasn't saved. Her body was found half a kilometer away. The neighbor woman, who heard the scream and was the first to run out of her house with a shovel, the creature took with it. She was never found. We moved to another city where the streets are lit and the walls are thin, but at least they don't smell of Volan earth. Dad aged in a month. Mom stares out the window, seeing nothing. I'm different now. The phantom pain in the missing arm is just a trifle. The main pain is the knowledge. I've spent countless nights at the computer, searching for answers in the dark corners of the internet, in digitized old folklore collections. I learned about IRKA, the undead, a creature born from an unjust death that hates life but needs it for its own existence. It doesn't drink blood as a beverage, it sucks out the very life force, leaving only bones. It comes to those it knows because it's drawn to the warmth of family ties, and it knows how to speak with the voices of those we know. Do I regret? Yes, every day, that I didn't speak up then, that I thought myself smarter than old tales, that I let fear defeat caution. But this isn't the end. My life split into two parts, before and after, and in this second part, there's no room for naivety anymore. I'm not seeking justice. It doesn't exist for such things. I'm seeking an ending. Somewhere out there in the Volan fields, among the roots of oaks and in cold streams, that glowing emptiness is still alive. And I know this story isn't closed yet. I'll return not as a hero, but as someone who carries an answer. Not a weapon, knowledge. Because now, I'm part of the tale too. And real tales don't end. They just wait for their turn.